Hello and welcome to the RPG Blender, where we give lesser played games and forgotten settings the roll the dice they deserve. I'm your host, Game Master George, and today we will be taking a look at a quick start for a Kickstarter RPG. This will be a bit different from my normal videos. As it's a quick start, I won't be doing the deep rules dive I normally do. Instead, I'll be giving a quick overview of the theme, mechanics, and included adventure to help you get an idea if this is a game worth your backing bucks. Then I'll give my personal opinions on the system and what I hope to see in the finished product. If this sounds helpful, go ahead and click that subscribe button and the notification bell. I will also state that this video is in no way sponsored. No product was provided. All opinions are mine and mine alone. As well, this is a Kickstarter project, so rules are subject to change. This is a first reading of a quick start product, so there could be misinterpretations here. Things will undoubtedly get clearer once the full rules are revealed, but this first look at a Quickstarter is always helpful to tell if this sounds like a game that's worth a look. And with that out of the way, let's dive into a Kickstarter Quickstarter for Lighthearted, a magical 80s RPG. To begin with, let's talk about the theme. Lighthearted is a magical fantasy setting, taking place in an alternate version of the 1980s. This version of the 80s is based on how the media portrays the decade. Neon everywhere. But more importantly, this is a world where magic is the norm. It is a part of everyday life and anyone can use it. However, it takes study to use effectively. This brings us to the main setting. The player characters are all trope-embodying freshmen at El Camino Community College of Magic and Technology. Key to the setting, this isn't a top-tier university. It's no Hogwarts. It is a place where people from all walks of life can end up. This gives it a much more diverse population than some fancy, prestigious university. There is a fantasy religion as well, focusing on 4 deities, but they are not given much importance in the quick start setting fluff. Just noted that when someone sneezes, they may say, "Traveler bless you." They do have some references in the mechanics, but we'll touch on that later. Finally, for setting up the world, is the magic. Common magic is related to colors, tying to the 7 colors of the light spectrum. Magic is not subtle. It draws in light to power the effect. According to the quick start, this creates glowing neon signs that anyone can see. Now, it is possible they simply mean a big display of light, but I choose to believe that an actual neon sign materializes with a shape indicating the magic being used. Now, color magic is not the only magic, but it is the one the players have access to. There's also dark magic, which does not receive much descriptive fluff, aside from an indication that contact with dark magic can cause people to become chosen by the deities, or to become tempted. For the purpose of the quick start, tempted is put to the side, with becoming chosen being the result of dark magic exposure. And just a little detail I love, there are PSAs in the world warning against temptation. I personally would love to see Sonic the Hedgehog doing a PSA on the temptation of dark magic. So what can I say about the setting? It's great. I love the 80s theme, especially that it acknowledges that it is meant to portray the media version of the 80s rather than something realistic. This lets you get as big and loud as you want. Embody those 80s stereotypes. I want to see massive hair. Anyway, with the setting established, let's talk mechanics. If you watched my tutorial on Kids on Bikes, the base mechanic should seem familiar. Each trait has a die assigned to it, and if you would be using that trait, you roll that die. If the die shows the max value, you roll again and add. However, that is only half of the rolling system. In addition to traits, you also have emotions, which are tied to the color spectrum as magic is. In each scene, you will have the players deciding which emotion their character is feeling. They will then take a marker of some kind and place it on that emotion on their sheet. Then, when it comes time for a roll, the player will decide what emotion they feel about the action they are taking. This emotion does not need to match the scene emotion. Depending on how far away from the scene emotion their action emotion is, they will roll a different die. If the action emotion is the same as the scene emotion, they will roll a D8. If the action emotion is 1 step away from the scene emotion, they will roll a D6. Otherwise, if it's further, they will roll a D4. The end result is that you will roll 2 dice, 1 each for trait and emotion. You will then keep the larger roll, and that is your result for the check. These checks use a set difficulty table. Rolling an 8 through an 11 is a baseline success. If you rolled a 12 or higher, you succeed with some extra effect. If you roll a 4 through a 7, you succeed, but do so with consequence. However, if you roll a 2 or a 3, you fail with consequence. Finally, if both dice show 1s, You rolled snake eyes, a failure with great consequence. What are the consequences? Well, before the roll, consequences should be determined between the game master and the players. The player should know the consequence that is riding on their roll. These consequences come as conditions. Conditions are short descriptors that you will write under one of your traits. While you have this condition, you may not roll this trait. You will need to remove these conditions through roleplay and a successful roll. Alternatively, in the moment, the player can choose to resist the consequence. To do so, they look the game master boldly in the eye and state, as if, they will then make a roll to resist the condition. They will always successfully resist the condition, but they will be required to spend a certain number of hearts depending on the result of their roll. If they don't have enough hearts to pay the cost, they still resist, but they are removed from the remainder of the scene. We'll talk more on hearts later. After all this, you may be wondering, well, if you can just choose your emotion, why don't they just always use the scene emotion? It's gonna give the biggest die. Well, Timmy, that's because of stress. If you use your scene emotion, you check off one of the stress boxes under it. If you would need to check off a box, but there are none left, you receive a condition for an opposing emotion. Like with traits, until you manage to remove that condition, you may not roll using that emotion. On the other hand, if you roll an emotion which is not your scene emotion, then your scene emotion will shift one step toward your action emotion. Magic follows the same base mechanics as the general checks. They will still roll an appropriate trait, usually the mental trait, but will not choose an emotion. Instead, different magical effects are tied to specific emotions. For example, red for fire, yellow for conjuration, and violet for curses. The magic that's being done will determine the color used, which will then follow the same rules for determining the dice as with the emotions, increasing stress and shifting emotions as appropriate. The final mechanics to look at are strengths and malfunctions. Each character will have 2 of each. Strengths are perks your characters get. They could increase a trait die, give a magical ally, or a special ability. Malfunctions are a set of roleplay guidelines based on how society perceives your character. When you play into the malfunctions, you gain a heart. These hearts can be used to resist conditions or to re-roll a check. However, if you act in defiance of a malfunction, you instead receive XP. XP is of course not discussed in the Quickstart, but will presumably be used to improve your character. All in all, it's a pretty simple but effective mechanic. I'm sure there will be more nuance to it within the full rules, but they serve as a great foundation for the game. As with most Quickstarts, this comes with a quick adventure to help your players learn the rules. So let's give it a look. First off, it establishes the way in which you should set the scene. Think of it as if you're directing a movie. Describe the shots, the wide sweeping panorama, which slowly draws into the PCs. Or the close-up of 2 characters engaging in a heated discussion. Once you've framed the shot, ask your players what song is playing in the background. Build that killer 80s soundtrack. The adventure itself uses a school competition as a way to introduce different mechanics to the players. We begin with a tug-of-war match, which serves to demonstrate the base check mechanics through a physical challenge. It then moves to team recruitment, where they get to engage in a social challenge. The third scene teaches them how to use magic, as they attempt to inflict conditions on their opponent, or a mechanical bull the opponent's riding. The fourth challenge is a talent competition, where your players will let their creativity fly to give some kind of grand spectacle. Finally, they will need to band together to face a darkspawn creature, serving as a culmination of what they've learned throughout the adventure, and giving them chosen powers. Effectively, 2 extra strengths based on one of the 4 deities. Once the darkspawn is beaten back, read has enough conditions placed on it, they have completed the adventure and get to narrate their individual epilogues. The adventure is short, sweet, and a good intro to the game. Not much to say, it's not terribly deep as far as plot goes, but it does what it needs to, setting up structured scenes for your players to learn the mechanics in. In all, it does what it needs to, despite not offering much in the way of story points. So what are my final thoughts on this system? Well, clearly I have high hopes for it. I think the mechanics work great. They are just abstract enough to be able to capture a wide variety of situations, and the unique emotion mechanic helps it stand out amongst other games. That said, I do have a few minor issues with the Quickstart. First, I'm left wondering how a player character could be defeated. My assumption is that when they reach a certain number of conditions, they are unable to continue, but the book doesn't discuss that. And for good reason. With the adventure outlined, it doesn't seem likely that there could be much chance of that happening. But still, it would be nice to know what happens if the dice decide they hate the players that day. Second, since this game has static check values, it's not clear how to handle opposed checks. This is something common in these types of fixed target systems, where there is a question about what happens if two players take opposing sides. Let's say my two players decide to duke it out. Do they both roll against the standard targets and apply the consequences as normal? Does that mean that they could both succeed with no consequences? Could one person end up loaded with two conditions as a result of the roll? Again, this is something that will likely be addressed in the final version of the rules, as there's not really a situation where that should occur within these quick start adventure. Third, the way the book is formatted makes it a little difficult to find specific rules. For example, the effects of maxing out stress are only found on the page describing magic, rather than the regular mechanics description. However, they do have a rules cheat sheet. The only problem is it's a separate document. I would love to see this cheat sheet added as an appendix to the Quick Start guide, a place for players to go to quickly look up a specific rule. Finally, I think it would be a great opportunity to have the soundtrack be part of the mechanics. Perhaps each song has an emotion assigned to it, strengthening that emotion for the scene. This could increase the die type by one step, while also increasing the stress gained to counterbalance it. Just a little something to bring the music more into the game, rather than just being set dressing. All in all, I find this to be a very promising game. I personally look forward to getting my hands on a copy of it once it becomes available. I may end up making a few tweaks here and there, but that is the beauty of systems like this. You can easily adjust them to fit your specific table's style. If the game seems interesting, its Kickstarter runs through February 26th, 2021. You'll find a link to it in the description below. Meanwhile, thank you for coming to check out this, our first Kickstarter Quickstarter. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it's helped you to find out if this is a game that would appeal to you. And if there's another quick start that you'd like us to do an interpretation of, please let us know. We'd be happy to look at it. Meanwhile, please like, comment, subscribe, and come back for our next videos. We also have more tabletop action coming on our Twitch channel, so check us out at twitch.tv/rpgblender. Anyway, thank you again, and remember, there's gaming outside the Forgotten Realms.